Good morning, boys and girls. I'm Eleanor Hawkins, and welcome to Telestory Time. The Library, a Magic Castle. Come to the Magic Castle when you are growing tall. Rows upon word windows line every single wall. They reach up high as the sky, and you want to open them all. For every time you open one, a new adventure has begun. The Library, a Magic Castle. And now, boys and girls, the very first story that I've chosen for this morning is entitled The Ugly Duckling. Oh, it was summer and lovely out in the country. In the midst of the sunshine lay an old farm surrounded by deep canals. Near the water, a mother duck was sitting on her nest, waiting for her ducklings to hatch. One eggshell after another cracked open, and little creatures stuck out their heads. But the biggest egg was still unbroken. When it did hatch, a large and ugly creature tumbled out. "That is a terribly large duckling," said the mother duck. "None of the others look like that." The next day, the weather was fine. Mother duck came down to the water's edge with all her little ones. Splash! Into the water they jumped. "Quack, quack," she called, and then one duckling after another tumbled in. The water closed over their heads, but they came up in an instant and floated beautifully. The ugly gray duckling swam about with them. "Quick, quick, quick, come with me," said Mother Duck. "I'll take you out into the world and introduce you to the duck yard." But the other ducks in the yard looked at them and said loudly, "Now we're to have all that crowd too? There are enough of us already, and look at that ugly duckling. We won't stand for him." And one duck flew up and bit him in the neck. "Let him alone," said Mother Duck. "He does no harm to anyone. He is a good-mannered and swims as well as any of you." But the poor duckling that had been the last to hatch, looked so ugly, was still being bitten and pushed around by the ducks. He was in despair and decided to run away. He went over the hedge fence and made the little birds in the bushes flutter up in fear. "That is because I'm so ugly," he thought. He kept running on and came to the great moor where the wild ducks lived. Here he lay down all night, weary and downcast. In the morning the wild ducks flew up and looked at their new companion. "Pray, who are you?" they asked, and the duckling turned in every direction and bowed as well as he could. "Oh, you are remarkably ugly," said the wild ducks. Again he ran away, traveling over field and meadow and floating down the waterways. Toward evening the duckling came to a little hut in which lived an old woman with her cat and her hen. The strange duckling was noticed at once, and the cat began to purr, and the hen began to cluck. "Who is there?" called the old woman, looking all around. Now she could not see well, and she thought the duckling was a fat duck that had strayed. "Oh, this is a rare prize," she said. "Now I shall have duck eggs." Now the duckling remained at the hut, but after a time when he failed to lay eggs, the old woman ignored him. Oh, this made the duckling feel so sad. He thought of the canal and was seized with a longing to float on it. He left the hut and swam on the water and was happy, but not for long. Other ducks always slighted him because of his ugliness. The autumn came and the leaves in the wood turned yellow and brown. One evening when the sun was setting, the duckling saw a great flock of handsome birds. Oh, they were dazzling white with long necks. They were swans. They uttered a peculiar cry, spread out their great wings, and flew away. They mounted so very high. The ugly duckling had such a strange feeling as he watched them. He had never seen anything so beautiful. He turned around and around in the water like a wheel, stretched out his neck toward them and uttered a strange, loud cry. Now, it would be too sad to mention all the misery the ugly duckling had to go during that cold winter. He was so alone in the world. He was lying out on the moor among the reeds when the sun began to warm again and the larks to sing. Beautiful springtime had come. All at once the duckling raised his wings. They flapped with much greater strength than before and bore him swiftly away. Before he knew where he was, he found himself in a lovely garden where the fragrant lilacs bent their long green branches down to the winding streams. From the thicket came 3 glorious white swans. Oh, they ruffled their feathers and swam lightly on the water. The duckling knew the splendid creatures, and he was overcome by a strange sadness. I will fly to them, the royal birds, and they will kill me because I am so ugly. But it is better to be killed by them than to suffer so much misery. He flew into the water and swam toward the beautiful swans. Kill me, said the poor creature, and he bowed his head toward the water, expecting nothing more but death. But what did he see in the clear water? He saw his own image, and he was no longer a clumsy bird. He, too, was a swan. The great swans swarmed around him and stroked him with their bills. Soon little children came into the garden. The youngest one cried, "Oh, there is a new one." The other children shouted with joy, "Yes, a new swan has arrived, and he is the most beautiful of all. Oh, he's so young and handsome." The new swan felt quite bashful and hid his head under his wing, for he did not know what to think. He was very happy, but not at all proud, for a good heart is never proud. He thought of how he had been scorned, and how he knew the children now saying that he was the most beautiful of all beautiful birds. Then he rustled his feathers, lifted his slender neck, and cried joyously, "I never did dream of such happiness when I was still the ugly duckling." And that, boys and girls, is the story of the ugly duckling. And now stay tuned, and we'll be back in just a moment to read from our big Do You Know book. Stay tuned. Boys and girls, you know we are celebrating Black History Month, and I have something special to tell you that you might not know about. You know, back in September the 24th in 2016, the National Museum of African American History and Culture opened, and it was on September the 24th, 2016. And you know, boys and girls, this is the 19th museum to be added to the Smithsonian Institution. Maybe you will try to visit the next time you go to Washington, D.C. And now we are celebrating Black History Month, and I have some big Do You Knows to read from our big Do You Know book. Do you know we have celebrated Black History Month since 1976? Before that, we observed Black History Week. Do you know Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. gave his famous speech, "I Have a Dream," on August the 28th, 1963, to 250,000 people that were in Washington, D.C. Do you know that Dr. King received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1964? Do you know that Coretta Scott King's awards are given each year to an author and an illustrator of children's books who promote the cause of peace and world brotherhood. Do you know that Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin in 1793, and it could clean as much cotton in a day as 50 people working by hand? Remarkable. I bet you know this, do you know? Do you know that Michael Jordan, the outstanding basketball player from Wilmington, North Carolina, played basketball at UNC Chapel Hill for the Tar Heels? Do you know that Jackie Robinson of the Brooklyn Dodgers became the first black player in Major League Baseball in 1947? He helped break down racial barriers in all professional sports. Do you know that Booker T. Washington, the principal of Tuskegee Institute, was the most influential United States black leader in the early 1900s? Do you know, in 1989, Colin Powell, a United States Army general, became the first black chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and that is the top military advisory group in the United States. Do you know Carol Moseley Brown of Illinois became the first black woman elected to the United States Senate in 1992? These are remarkable do you knows, and boys and girls, be sure and visit your public library anytime during this next week at any of the libraries in the Craven, Pamlico, Carteret Regional Library System. Be sure to check out a very good book on your very own library card. And now stay tuned for another story. We'll be back in just a moment. And now, boys and girls, I'm going to read you the story, The Popcorn Party. Once when you and I were no bigger than a maybe, there was a little old woman who lived in a tiny yellow cottage. Through the long cold winter, she spent most of her time making rugs that had fancy designs. In the summer, she tended her vegetable garden and her pansy beds. She hardly ever went anywhere, and she didn't have much excitement. But one day there came a very special day. It was the little old woman's 100th birthday, and she was going to celebrate. After breakfast, she went out to the vegetable garden behind her tiny yellow cottage and picked 4 golden pumpkins. Now, I'll take these to town, said the little old woman to herself, and perhaps the grocer will let me trade them for some popcorn. Then I will ask some of the children in this evening to help me celebrate my birthday, and we will pop the corn. But before I invite any of them, I must find out if the grocer will let me trade these for some popcorn. And she put the 4 golden pumpkins into her green wheelbarrow. The little old woman was very happy as she wheeled the pumpkins down the cobblestone street to the grocery store. The grocer was a kindly old man with the bright blue eyes and a cheery smile. "And what can I do for you, little old woman?" he asked as she came in the door. "If you please, Mr. Grocer, I'd like to trade these 4 pumpkins for a pound of popcorn." "A pound of popcorn?" he cried. "Why, pumpkins are worth at least 5 pounds of popcorn." So the little old woman wheeled her 5 pounds of popcorn back along the cobblestone street to her cottage and thought of all the fun she was going to have eating popcorn with her friends. When she reached home, she went about the neighborhood, inviting the children to help her celebrate. All up and down the street, the boys and girls squealed with delight when the little old woman told them that she was going to have a popcorn birthday party. Each child promised to be at the tiny yellow cottage at 5 o'clock. Then the little old woman returned home and spent the rest of the day tidying up her cottage. Soon the children began arriving. James Grager and the Smith children were the first to knock. I see my pages have stuck together. To the little old woman's front door. Right behind them came Peggy Sue and the Carpenter twins, Patty and Peter. Then came the 3 Allen girls, the Walker boys, and all the others. Now it didn't take long before 20 children were crowded into the little old woman's front parlor. "Oh, happy birthday to you," James Grager began to sing. "Happy birthday to you," all the other children joined in. Oh, thank you," replied the little old woman, and her face was all smiles as she seated her guests around the room. "Now, perhaps you would like to play guessing games while I pop the corn," she said. "I see something in this room that is red and black and white, and it starts with the letter S," began Peggy Sue, thinking of the sampler which hung over the little old woman's fireplace. While the children were guessing what Peggy Sue would be thinking of, the little old woman held the big wire corn popper over the flames and shook it back and forth. Oh, soon the corn hopped and skipped about, bursting into big white kernels. That smells good," said the little old woman to herself as she poured the popcorn into yellow bowls. But there was only enough popcorn to fill 6 bowls, and there were 20 children. Then the little old woman had an idea. "Well, why not pop all the rest of the corn all at once?" "That's it," she cried. "That's just what I'll do. Then and there we will have enough popcorn with having not to wait." So she poured the rest of the 5 pounds of corn into the popper, and she chuckled just to think what a smart little old woman she was. She went back to the fire and began shaking the popper back and forth, back and forth. Then soon the kernels began bursting into white fluffy balls. Faster and faster the kernels popped and danced. Fuller and fuller became the corn popper until the lid burst open and the popcorn came jumping out into the fire. "Oh, gracious," cried the little old woman. "What shall I do? Well, what shall I do?" The corn was now flying about the room like a snowstorm. Forgetting all about the guessing game, the children hopped from their chairs and began running from flying popcorn. Scrunch, scrunch, scrunch went the popcorn under their feet as they scrambled from one spot to another. The little old woman was still holding the corn popper because she was so bewildered that she didn't know what else to do. Crackle, pop, swoosh went the popcorn as hundreds of kernels exploded and shot out of the popper at the same time. Oh, there was popcorn everywhere. Finally, the little old woman dropped the popper and waded in popcorn up to her ankles to reach the front door. "Oh me, oh my," she wailed, when she and the children were safely outside. "What can I do? My tiny cottage will be filled to bursting with popcorn in a short while." "Well, we'll call the fire department. That's what we'll do," cried James Grager. "Yes, that's just what we'll do," shouted all the other children. "The firemen will put out the fire, and then the corn won't pop any more." Soon, with whistles and screaming and screeching, the big red fire engine pulled up beside the little old woman's tiny yellow cottage. Now, by this time, the white popcorn was even skipping out of the open front door. The firemen had never seen such a sight. Everywhere was popcorn, popcorn, and more popcorn. They unwound their long hose and, scrunching through the popcorn in their high rubber boots, they made their way into the house and finally put out the fire. James Grader, Peggy Sue, and all the other children helped the fireman and the little old woman shovel the popcorn out of the tiny yellow cottage. But you know, even with all this help, it took the little old woman 3 weeks and 2 days to make her cottage spick and span again. And she repeated over and over to herself that she would never, never make such a foolish mistake again. And that, boys and girls, is a story, The Popcorn Party. And now stay tuned, and we'll be back with another story in just a moment. And now, boys and girls, I'm going to read The Children That Lived in a Shoe. There was an old woman who lived in a shoe. She had so many children, she didn't know what to do. But they all were so handsome and clever, I'm told, that she wouldn't trade one for diamonds or gold. There were middle-sized children and short ones and tall, and babies with tummies as round as a ball. They had blue eyes and brown eyes and pigtails and curls, and the boys were all jolly, and so were the girls. They each had a dog or a bird or a cat, a goat or a bunny, or something like that. They each had a drum or a fiddle-dee-dee and a little striped suit for a swim in the sea. They each had a wagon, a doll, or a kite, and no one was lonely from morning till night. They each knew a story, a song or a rhyme, a joke or a riddle for passing the time. They each could do handsprings and flip-flops and reels and turn a fine somersault head over heels. They each knew a game that was jolly to play, so they always were merry and happy and gay. The shoe house they lived in, both outside and in, was as clean as a whistle and neat as a pin. From the heel to the toe, it was scoured and scrubbed, and painted and polished, and dusted and rubbed. Willie and Tilly and Bennett and Bun washed all the windows to let in the sun. Nancy and Lulabelle dusted the rooms and swept the floors clean with their own little brooms. Patrick climbed up on the roof, it is said, and painted the chimney a beautiful red. Sally and Sue set the table at 3 and put on the kettle for making the tea. Jack ran to the store every evening at 6 for lollipops, taffy, or peppermint sticks. Molly made cookies and jam for their bread and baked each a birthday cake high as his head. Anne made the puppies bonnets and shoes and read them a story out of the news. Mickey made hats for the ponies and goats and fed them a sugar plum after their oats. Betty knit sweaters and socks for the kittens and ironed their hankies and mended their mittens. With children so clever, the old woman cried, "It's time for my housework and plenty beside." She made them red parasols, raincoats and boots, and caps with tassels and snow-balling suits. She packed them a picnic whenever they asked it, with ham and bananas and pop in a basket. She made them all pocketbooks just the right size, with a penny in each for a special surprise. It's jolly as jolly to live in a shoe. The children all cried, and the old woman too. And that, boys and girls, is the story, The Children That Lived in the Shoe. So now we close our book of stories for this morning. Until next week, this is Eleanor Hawkins saying bye-bye for Telestory Time.